The human walked into the darkest void's territory carrying twins. Now the Empress army surrendered. The galaxy was a vast place, full of stars, planets, and mysteries that no one had yet explored. Among these mysteries was a region known as the Darkest Void. Its name alone made even the bravest explorers shiver. The darkness there was different from normal space. It was thick, almost solid, as if it could swallow a starship in a single gulp. Rumors said nothing could survive inside. Ships vanished. Soldiers went in and never returned. Even the Empress herself, who ruled countless worlds, had avoided it. To most, it was untouchable. But one human did not seem to care. She stepped onto the edge of the darkest void, carrying two small children in her arms. Her steps were steady. She moved like someone walking across a familiar meadow, not a place feared across the galaxy. Her hair flowed gently in the zero gravity of her ship's open airlock, and her face showed no fear, only focus. The twins, wrapped in soft blankets, stared around with wide, curious eyes. They made small noises, giggling as the woman adjusted their hold. Watching from the Empress's nearby fleet, the soldiers and officers whispered among themselves. Their ships hovered at the very edge of the darkness, sensors scanning, weapons ready. "She's human," one young lieutenant said, his voice shaky. "No one should be able to walk into that place and survive, and she has children with her." A general, older and more experienced, shook his head. "Humans always surprise us. We may think we know them, but they have a strength no technology can measure." The human took a deep breath and stepped off her ship. Her boots touched the first layer of darkness like stepping onto solid ground. The void was silent at first, but it seemed to react, almost noticing her presence. Shadows twisted and swirled around her, forming shapes that defied explanation. She did not flinch. She walked calmly, making her way deeper into the unknown. The twins made soft, cooing sounds. One of them reached out a tiny hand, and the human smiled down at them. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm right here. Nothing will hurt you." The darkness seemed to pause at her words. Creatures hidden within the void shifted, observing, curious but cautious. They had never seen anything like her. She carried no weapons, wore no armor, yet she moved with confidence that radiated outward. Even the emptiness itself seemed to respond, pulsing gently in acknowledgement. Back at the edge of the void, the Empress's fleet continued to watch, unable to look away. Their instruments went wild. Energy readings, gravimetric scans, even communications equipment behaved strangely near the human. It was as if she carried a force that no one had ever recorded before. The general frowned, realizing something unusual was happening. "She's affecting the void itself," he murmured. "Our sensors can't explain it. She's alive in a way that makes the void calm." The young lieutenant's mouth dropped open. How can one person do this? How can a human just walk in, carrying two children, and nothing happen? The general's eyes did not leave the viewing screen. Humans are capable of things we cannot predict. Fear does not control them. Danger does not stop them. And apparently neither does darkness. Inside the void, the woman walked further, her steps confident but gentle. She noticed subtle changes. Shadows that had once seemed threatening now twisted into soft patterns. The air, or whatever could be called air here, seemed to hum around her. She paused to let the twins rest, placing them carefully on a patch of soft, glowing moss that grew in this strange land. They looked around in wonder, their small hands reaching for shapes of light. The woman smiled, brushing their hair gently. "See, it's beautiful." "Don't be afraid." The creatures of the void approached slowly. They had lived for eons in the darkness, never knowing warmth, never knowing life. Now they hovered close, sensing something they could not understand. The twins' laughter echoed softly, and for the first time the void felt life in its presence. The darkness pulsed with gentle ripples, almost like it was breathing in rhythm with the humans' calm movements. Above, the Empress watched in disbelief. Her advisors whispered urgently, trying to explain what was happening. "It's impossible," one said. "No one should survive there. No one should have any effect on it." The Empress held her hand to her chin, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Humans are always more than we expect. I have ruled the galaxy, yet I have never understood them fully. Perhaps it is time to reconsider what they are capable of." Meanwhile, the human gathered the twins in her arms again. She moved with care, stepping lightly over a shimmering river of darkness that looked almost solid. Tiny creatures, invisible to the naked eye, swirled around her, following her movements. Some seemed curious, others cautious. None dared harm her or the children. It was as if the void itself was acknowledging her presence, bending slightly to her calm, confident energy. Hours passed, though time seemed meaningless here. The human walked steadily, guiding the twins through passages of darkness that had never been crossed. She did not speak loudly, did not make sudden moves. Her quiet confidence and the soft, steady sounds of the twins' voices created an invisible path through the shadows. The void, which had existed for millennia as a place of fear, was no longer entirely hostile. From the edge of the darkness, the Empress's fleet could only watch. Their weapons were useless here, their sensors confused. Even the bravest officers admitted they did not understand what they were witnessing. "She's changing it," the general finally said aloud. "Not with weapons, not with strength. She's changing it with something else, something humans have that we cannot measure." The lieutenant shivered, gripping the edge of the control panel. "What can it be? How is it possible?" The general smiled faintly. "It's simple, really. Humans are not afraid of being alone, even in the darkness. Humans care for each other, even when the world tells them they cannot survive. And humans always find a way to shine, even where there is no light." Deep inside the void, the human paused at a ridge overlooking a valley of shadows. She set the twins down again, letting them peer over the edge. The twins giggled, pointing at strange shapes that moved in the darkness below. The woman chuckled softly, brushing their hair. "You see, there's nothing to fear. This place is just another home we haven't explored yet." The shadows below seemed to pulse in rhythm with the twins' laughter. Creatures that had once been terrifying now moved in patterns that were gentle, curious, almost playful. The human reached out her hand, and one of the shadows drifted closer, brushing her fingers lightly. She smiled, nodding in acknowledgement. The void, ancient and feared, was learning something it had never known, that humans could bring calm, light, and life even to the places others abandoned. At the edge of the darkness, the Empress leaned back in her chair, her face pale but thoughtful. "She carries no weapons. She carries no armor. She carries only her children, and she walks where no one else dares. This is remarkable." Her advisors stared in disbelief. "We cannot interfere," one whispered. "Even if we tried, our fleet would fail. We are powerless here." "Yes," the Empress said softly, "but she is human, and humans, they are always more than we expect." Inside the void, the human continued walking, carrying the twins with care. The shadows that once moved threateningly now seemed to recognize her as something new, something different. They shifted, glimmered, and moved aside, clearing a path that no force in the galaxy could block. She paused occasionally to let the twins explore, watching their laughter ripple through the darkness. Tiny lights sparked across the shadows, as if the void itself was smiling for the first time in its long history. By the end of her first journey into the heart of the void, the human had done what no human or alien had ever done before. She had walked into a place of pure darkness, carrying life with her, and left it changed. Not destroyed, not conquered, but transformed. Even the Empress, observing from afar, could not deny it. Something extraordinary was happening here, something that would shift the understanding of the galaxy forever. Humans had entered the darkest void carrying only love, courage, and hope. And in return, the darkness had begun to listen. The twins giggled as the human looked down at them, smiling softly. "We're home," she whispered. "Even here we are home." And for the first time, the darkest void felt the touch of life it had never known before. The human moved deeper into the darkest void, carrying the twins gently in her arms. The darkness was dense, thick enough to feel almost solid under her feet, yet she walked confidently. The twins, small and curious, gazed around in wonder. Their wide eyes reflected faint lights that shimmered through the shadows. They made soft sounds, laughing quietly as the human shifted her hold and adjusted their blankets. The void, for all its fearsome reputation, seemed to change around her. Shadows that had long been chaotic and threatening now seemed to pause. Shapes that had shifted unpredictably began to move with rhythm, almost as if listening. Tiny glimmers of light sparked here and there, following the twins' movements. Even creatures that had lived for centuries in total darkness now approached, hovering close but carefully, as though trying to understand what she was. The human lowered herself to one knee, setting the twins down on a patch of soft moss that glowed faintly in the darkness. They sat up, giggling and reaching out toward the strange shadows. The creatures drifted closer, curious and cautious, and the twins' laughter echoed, bouncing gently off the void's walls. It was the first sound of pure joy the void had ever known. Look at them, she whispered softly. They see beauty where others see only darkness. That's their gift. The creatures seemed to respond to her words, twisting and flowing around her in patterns that were not frightening, but gentle. The void itself pulsed in time with the twins' small, happy noises, as though it were learning to breathe. Far away, the Empress watched the human from her command station aboard her flagship. Her fingers hovered over her control panel, but she did not move. The images streaming in from sensors showed something the galaxy had never recorded: a human carrying children moving through the darkest void and causing it to shift and glow. She's affecting it, one advisor whispered. I've never seen this before. Nothing alive should be able to change the void. The Empress leaned forward, studying the screens. Humans have always been extraordinary, she said softly. They are small, fragile, but they carry something no machine can measure, something we cannot control. Inside the void, the human stood and continued forward, her steps careful but steady. The twins waddled behind her, holding onto the folds of her clothing. Shadows shifted aside as they walked, making a path that seemed natural. Tiny sparkles of light followed their movement, illuminating the way. Don't worry, she said gently to the twins. Everything here is just new, nothing can hurt you. The twins reached out with their tiny hands, touching faintly glowing shapes. The creatures, sensing innocence and curiosity, mirrored their movements. The interaction was subtle, delicate, and full of wonder. The void, which had once been feared for its emptiness and chaos, now held the quiet joy of life. The human paused at a small ridge overlooking a valley of shifting shadows. She set the twins down again, letting them peer over the edge. The twins laughed, pointing to shapes that moved like flowing water. Shadows that had once been menacing now drifted in harmony with their movements, glimmering softly in response. The human smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. See, there's nothing to fear. Everything here has its place. You just have to pay attention. She knelt down and touched the ground lightly. The shadows nearest her shifted again, flowing around her fingers like liquid. It was as if they were listening, trying to understand what life felt like. The twins giggled, reaching toward the glowing shapes. One of them clapped, and the sound echoed in the void, bouncing off surfaces in a gentle rhythm. The human laughed softly, a clear and calm sound that seemed to resonate with the darkness. Far above, the Empress's fleet watched in awe. Sensors could no longer measure the energy around the human. Communications equipment failed to record data. Instruments designed to detect danger, life, and energy went haywire. The general overseeing the fleet shook his head. She's not just surviving, he said. She's shaping it. The void itself is responding to her. A young lieutenant, wide-eyed, whispered, How can one person do this? She has no armor, no weapons. She's just a human. The general smiled faintly. That is exactly why. Humans are not afraid of fear. Humans care for others. Humans bring light to places where darkness rules. That is their strength. Inside the void, the human continued her journey with the twins. They moved carefully over glowing rivers and soft, shadowed hills. Wherever they went, the shadows responded. Some creatures that had lived for centuries without any interaction now followed closely, twisting gently as if trying to understand life. The twins reached out their hands, giggling as shapes shifted in response. The human watched them, her eyes calm and kind. You see, she whispered again, life finds a way everywhere, even here. Time lost meaning in the void. Minutes, hours, or perhaps days passed. The human and her twins traveled steadily, never rushing, never hesitating. The shadows had formed a quiet path following her lead. The creatures she had encountered earlier now moved with her, some brushing softly against her clothing, others hovering above the twins as though protecting them. At one point, the twins stumbled, tripping over a mound of soft moss. The human caught them quickly, laughing softly. Careful, she said. We walk together always, that's how we make it through. Her calmness and care had an effect beyond the twins. The void, ancient and fearful of life, had begun to understand something new, that life could exist in harmony with darkness. The creatures, once threatening in their appearance, now mirrored her patience and gentleness. Back at the edge of the void, the Empress spoke quietly to herself. The human is not fighting the void, she is teaching it, and in doing so, she is teaching us all something we cannot yet understand. Her advisors exchanged nervous glances. We cannot interfere, one said. Even if we tried, our fleet would be useless here. Yes, the Empress replied, her voice steady, but humans are always more than we expect, and this one she carries the gift of life itself. Inside the void, the human reached a plateau overlooking a vast expanse of shadows. She placed the twins down again, letting them explore. The twins ran, laughing, reaching toward moving shapes. Each movement seemed to create patterns of light that spread across the darkness. Creatures that had lived for eons in isolation now joined in, swirling and gliding gently as if learning to dance for the first time. The human knelt, touching the ground lightly. The shadows moved in response, flowing around her fingers. Tiny lights sparked, illuminating the area. The twins clapped and giggled, their joy echoing in the void. The human smiled, watching them. "This place isn't empty," she whispered. "It's waiting for someone who cares, and now it has us." The void responded in quiet pulses. Shadows moved, flowing like water. Creatures hovered, observing. Even the ground seemed to hum softly beneath her hands. The twins laughed again, reaching toward a small glowing shape that floated near them. The human reached out her hand, touching it gently. The shape shifted, spinning gracefully, and the twins clapped. Above, the Empress observed silently. Her fleet could not advance. Sensors could not measure. Every instrument failed, and yet she understood. She understood that this human had entered the darkest void and had brought something no one else could: life, joy, and understanding. "She walks not to conquer, but to guide," the general said quietly. And the void responds, "Humans always surprise us." The lieutenant looked in awe. "They're just small, fragile creatures, and yet she carries power we cannot see. Why is that?" The general smiled. "Because humans understand things no one else does. Fear does not stop them. Darkness does not stop them. Life and hope guide them where no weapon can." Inside the void, the human lifted the twins back into her arms. They yawned, tired but happy. She smiled down at them. "Time to rest," she whispered. "Even here we can sleep safely." She found a soft area, glowing faintly, and laid them down gently. The creatures that had followed now surrounded the twins carefully, forming a quiet, protective circle. The void, which had once been feared as empty and hostile, now held a sense of calm. The human lay down beside the twins, her eyes scanning the shadows. She breathed slowly and calmly, and the void seemed to respond. The shadows swirled gently, moving softly, almost like waves in a dark sea. Life had arrived here in its purest form, and even the darkest void had accepted it. The twins' soft breathing and occasional giggles echoed across the area. The human whispered again, softly, "We are here. We are safe, and even in the darkest place, life finds a way." Far away, the Empress watched, silent and thoughtful. The fleet had done nothing, and yet the human had achieved what no one could. The void, feared by all, had not only accepted her presence, but had begun to change in her wake. The human, carrying hope, care, and life, had entered a place no one else could, and the darkest void had never been the same. The human continued her journey deeper into the darkest void, carrying the twins securely in her arms. Each step she took seemed to reshape the darkness around her. Shadows that had once moved unpredictably now flowed in rhythm with her movements, almost as if they were dancing to a silent melody only she could hear. The twins' small hands reached out to touch the flickering lights that hovered in the void, and with every touch, the darkness seemed less threatening, more alive. She walked carefully, pausing occasionally to let the twins explore tiny glowing patches of moss or soft, floating light. The twins laughed softly, their voices ringing like bells through the vast emptiness. Each giggle seemed to ripple through the shadows, creating patterns that no machine or mind could have predicted. For the first time in eons, the darkest void felt life moving through it, soft, gentle, and unafraid. Creatures that had never interacted with life before hovered nearby, curious and careful. They approached the twins cautiously, sensing the children's pure innocence. The twins, oblivious to the strange tension that had long existed here, reached out with open hands, and the creatures responded by mirroring their movements. It was a dance of understanding, of trust, of something the void had never experienced. The human knelt to the twins' level, her hands brushing gently across their hair. "See," she whispered, "nothing here will hurt you. Everything is just waiting to be understood. You just need to be kind." The creatures seemed to absorb her words, their movements slowing as if trying to learn from her calm voice. Shadows shifted around her, forming shapes that were less frightening and more beautiful. The void itself seemed to breathe softly, responding to her presence with subtle waves of energy. High above, the Empress watched the unfolding events with growing amazement. Her fleet hovered at the edge of the void, unable to advance, unable to understand the changes occurring within. Screens flickered with readings that made no sense. Instruments failed to measure the energies that pulsed from the human and the twins. The Empress, usually confident and commanding, leaned forward, her eyes focused intently. "She's changing it," her advisor murmured. "The void responds to her without weapons, without force. She is alive in a way we have never recorded." "Yes," the Empress replied softly. "Humans are more than we can ever predict. They carry hope, courage, and life in ways that no technology or army can match." The human continued walking, her pace calm but deliberate. She carried the twins with care, stopping occasionally to let them explore. The twins reached out to touch a floating shadow, and it responded by swirling gently around their fingers. Tiny lights sparked in response to their laughter, illuminating the darkness with delicate patterns. The creatures of the void, sensing the twins' joy and the humans' guidance, began to move more freely. What had once been threatening shadows now resembled flowing streams of light and color, shifting in harmony with the human and her children. It was a transformation unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The twins clapped their hands, laughing, and the humans smiled down at them. "You see, life finds its way everywhere," she said, "even here." As they moved further, they came to a vast expanse, a deep valley where the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly. The twins, eager and curious, ran ahead to explore the glowing patches scattered across the valley floor. The human followed closely, guiding them gently. The creatures of the void followed too, forming patterns of movement that were delicate, graceful, and full of wonder. The human paused, watching the twins interact with the shadows. "The darkness isn't empty," she said softly. "It's just waiting for life to touch it. And now it has us." The twins laughed again, and their voices echoed softly through the valley. Every sound they made seemed to bring new light, new shapes, and new patterns into the void. The creatures of the void, once solitary and fearful, now moved in unison with the children's joy. It was as if the human's presence had unlocked a hidden potential in the darkness, something it had never known before. Back at the edge of the void, the Empress's fleet struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Sensors continued to fail, communication systems went silent, and instruments designed to measure energy produced readings that made no sense. Officers whispered among themselves, unsure how to proceed. "She's not attacking," one officer said in disbelief. "She isn't using force, she's teaching it, guiding it, and the void responds." The general overseeing the fleet nodded slowly. "Humans are remarkable," he said. "Small, fragile creatures, and yet they carry something no other species does. Life, hope, courage. They can bring light to places where nothing else survives." Inside the void, the human guided the twins to a soft plateau overlooking a stream of shimmering shadows. The twins knelt down, touching the glowing shapes and giggling as the shadows flowed around their hands. The human watched them with a calm, gentle smile. She knelt beside them, touching the moss beneath her fingers. The shadows responded, swirling around her touch, moving in harmony with her movements. "Everything here has its place," she whispered. "Even the shadows, even the darkness. It just needed someone to show it how to be understood." The twins clapped their hands, delighted, and the creatures of the void moved closer, drawn to the sound of laughter. Tiny lights sparked in response, illuminating the area with soft, beautiful patterns. The humans smiled down at the twins. "See, even here life can create beauty." Hours seemed to pass, though time had little meaning in the void. The human continued to guide the twins, moving carefully over hills of shadow and rivers of light. Wherever they went, the creatures of the void followed, learning to move with them, learning to respond to life and laughter. The twins reached out, touching glowing shapes, and the shadows danced in response, forming patterns that were both mesmerizing and calming. The human paused to let the twins rest, sitting them down on a soft patch of moss. She watched them play, their laughter echoing across the void. The creatures hovered nearby, curious but gentle. The darkness, which had once been feared and avoided by all, now seemed alive with quiet joy. Back at the fleet, the Empress watched silently. Her advisors whispered nervously, unsure how to interpret what they were seeing. The human had entered the darkest void carrying nothing but her children, and yet she had transformed it. "She carries no weapons," one advisor said. "No armor, no shields, and yet the void responds to her. How can this be?" The Empress shook her head slowly. "Humans always surprise us," she said. They are small and fragile, yet they carry life, hope, and courage. Nothing can match that. Inside the void, the human gathered the twins once more. They walked carefully to a small glade of soft, glowing moss. The twins explored, giggling, reaching out to touch floating lights. The shadows moved around them, flowing like liquid, creating patterns that were gentle and beautiful. The creatures of the void, once solitary and fearful, now interacted with the twins, responding to their joy and innocence. "This is the way of life," the human whispered. "Even in the darkest place, life can flourish. Even in fear, there can be joy. You just have to believe in it." The twins laughed, and their voices carried softly through the glade. The human knelt, brushing a hand across their hair. "We are here together," she said, "and together we can bring light anywhere." The shadows pulsed gently, forming shapes that had never existed before. Creatures hovered, curious and gentle. The void, which had been a place of fear and emptiness, now held the quiet rhythm of life. It moved in harmony with the human and her children, responding to their presence, their care, and their laughter. The Empress watched, her face thoughtful. She understood finally what was happening. This human, so small and fragile, carrying her children, had done what no army could. She had transformed the darkest void without weapons, without force. She had brought life, hope, and understanding. "She teaches without words," the general said softly. "She leads without orders, and the void obeys her not out of fear but out of recognition." The lieutenant nodded slowly, still in awe. "This is what makes humans special," he said. "They are small, but their hearts are immense." Inside the void, the human gathered the twins in her arms once more. She walked slowly, calmly, through the glowing shadows. The twins rested against her, content and happy. The creatures of the void followed gently, moving in patterns of beauty and trust. The darkness, once feared, now seemed peaceful, alive, and aware. For the first time, the darkest void knew life in a way it had never known before. And the human, carrying her children with love and care, had brought that knowledge to it. She had walked into the darkest place, and she had left it forever changed. The human walked slowly, carrying the twins in her arms, as the darkest void pulsed with an energy that had never existed before. Shadows, once feared for their chaotic nature, now moved gracefully around her, forming patterns that were almost musical in rhythm. Tiny lights sparkled like stars in the endless darkness, creating an atmosphere of calm, beauty, and quiet wonder. The twins laughed softly, their tiny hands reaching out to touch the glowing shapes, and with every touch, the void seemed to shimmer more brightly. The creatures of the void, once solitary and unapproachable, now hovered close. They twisted and flowed around the twins in harmony, responding to their innocence and curiosity. Each creature seemed to recognize the gentle presence of life and care. The humans smiled down at the twins, brushing their hair gently from their faces. "See," she whispered. "Even here we can make a home. Even here life is welcome." Far away, the Empress's fleet hovered at the edge of the void, watching in awe and disbelief. Their instruments had gone completely silent in this part of space. Sensors that once measured energy and life were reading impossible values. Ships remained frozen in place, not because they were restrained, but because the human's presence had made their purpose feel irrelevant. The Empress leaned forward in her chair, eyes fixed on the images transmitted from deep within the void. "She's not attacking," an advisor said quietly. "She isn't using weapons or force, and yet she controls the entire environment." "Yes," the Empress replied softly. "Humans have always been extraordinary. They are small, fragile, and yet they carry something no army or machine can match: life, hope, and the ability to inspire. Look at what she is doing. She walks among shadows, and the shadows obey her not out of fear, but out of respect and recognition." Inside the void, the human guided the twins to a plateau overlooking a valley of soft, flowing shadows. She set them down gently, letting them explore. The twins ran ahead, giggling as they touched floating shapes. The shadows responded, swirling gracefully around their fingers, creating patterns of light and color that seemed impossible to the human eye. The creatures of the void followed, moving closer to the twins, no longer cautious but curious. They mirrored the twins' movements, forming a delicate dance of life, shadow, and light. The human knelt beside them, watching their interaction with quiet pride. "This is what life does," she whispered. "It finds a way everywhere. It teaches even the darkest places to understand joy and care." Hours passed, though time had little meaning in the void. The human continued to walk with the twins, their laughter and movement leaving trails of light that shimmered across the darkness. Shadows shifted to accommodate them, forming paths that were both safe and beautiful. The creatures of the void learned from every interaction, moving with the twins, responding to their emotions, and becoming part of something they had never known, harmony. At the edge of the valley, a stream of glowing light meandered through the darkness. The twins knelt to touch it, giggling as the light rippled in response. The human smiled and touched it herself. The shadows around her responded immediately, forming soft waves of energy that radiated outward. Even creatures who had been far away felt the change, moving closer to see the gentle transformation that life could bring. The Empress observed silently, awe washing over her features. She could no longer deny what was happening. This human, so small and seemingly ordinary, had entered a place that had terrified entire civilizations for centuries and had brought it to life. The darkest void, long considered unapproachable and dangerous, now moved in harmony with her presence. "She walks without force," the general said quietly to the Empress. "And yet she leads. The void itself obeys her, not because it fears her, but because it understands her. That is something no army can do." The Empress nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Humans have always surprised us. They are small, but their hearts are immense. And now even the void has recognized it." Inside the void, the human gathered the twins in her arms again. They were tired but happy, their laughter fading into soft sighs of contentment. The creatures hovered around them, forming protective shapes, moving in gentle harmony. The human smiled down at the twins. "Rest now," she whispered. "Even in darkness, we are safe." The twins yawned and nestled into her arms. The human walked slowly to a patch of moss that glowed faintly. She lay the twins down carefully, brushing their hair from their faces. Around them, the void pulsed gently, as if it were breathing in rhythm with their calm. Shadows moved softly, creating a protective circle around the children. Even the smallest creatures that had followed them hovered quietly, forming patterns of gentle guardianship. From the edge of the void, the Empress watched as her fleet's instruments failed completely. Communications were impossible. Ships could no longer navigate safely within the area. Her generals approached nervously, reporting that the humans' presence had effectively neutralized their technology, not through force, but through the inherent power of life and care. "She has done what no army could," one general whispered. "She has tamed the void without a single weapon. She has brought life where there was only fear." "Yes," the Empress replied, her voice steady, "and now we must recognize it. The human does not need to fight us. She does not need to conquer. She walks among shadows carrying hope, and that is enough to change the course of everything." Inside the void, the human rose and lifted the twins. Together, they moved to a small hill overlooking a vast expanse of darkness that had once been chaotic and threatening. Now it shimmered with gentle light and flowing patterns, moving in harmony with the twins' small movements. Shadows shifted gracefully, and the creatures followed, forming intricate dances of life and understanding. The human spoke softly to the void. "You do not need to fear us, and we do not fear you. Together we can exist in harmony. You are part of this world, and so are we." The void seemed to respond, pulsing with soft waves of energy. The creatures moved closer, circling around the twins in delicate formations. The darkness, once feared across the galaxy, now hummed with gentle rhythm, alive with possibility. Far away, the Empress's fleet began to move in unison, not out of obedience, but out of understanding. The commanders reported that their ships could no longer function within the void's bounds, and further attempts to advance were impossible. The Empress, finally realizing the full scope of the human's power, gave a single command. "Cease all movements. Withdraw the fleet. The human is beyond confrontation." Her generals were astonished. "She hasn't even fought us," one said, "and yet our forces cannot continue." "We are powerless." "Yes," the Empress said quietly, "not because she is strong, but because she carries life itself, and life is the greatest power of all." Inside the void, the human and her twins walked slowly, their presence calming every shadow, illuminating every dark corner. The creatures followed obediently, forming patterns of gentle harmony. The twins' laughter rang softly, echoing through the valley and the hills. The human smiled down at them. "We have done well," she whispered. "Even in the darkest place, we can bring light." The twins yawned, leaning against her as they walked. The shadows swirled around them, protective and gentle. Creatures hovered nearby, curious but kind. forming patterns of care and understanding. The void, ancient and feared, had been transformed by life and compassion, and the human's presence had made it a place of quiet wonder. As the human reached the outer edge of the void, she paused, looking back at the paths they had traveled. The glowing patterns, the flowing shadows, the creatures that had once been solitary and fearful, all had been changed. The twins giggled softly, pointing at the creatures and the glowing shapes. The human laughed gently, brushing their hair from their faces. See, life always finds a way. The Empress, observing from afar, understood something profound. This small human, carrying her children, had walked into a place no army could conquer. She had transformed it not through force or weapons, but through life, hope, and care. The Empress realized that true power was not in armies or technology, but in the courage, empathy, and resilience that humans carried within them. The human and her twins moved to the very edge of the void. Shadows gently parted, creating a glowing path leading out of the darkness. The creatures followed respectfully, circling around them one last time before returning to the areas they now called home. The twins waved at the creatures, and the creatures seemed to respond, forming patterns that resembled bows and graceful arcs. The human lifted the twins, holding them close. She took a deep breath, stepping onto solid ground beyond the void. The shadows followed her to the edge but did not leave. Instead, they lingered, transformed, alive, and forever changed by the presence of life. The Empress, watching silently, finally spoke. "Humans are extraordinary," she said softly. "They do not conquer with force. They conquer with courage, compassion, and love, and that is a power we can never truly match." The twins laughed softly, their tiny voices carrying across the newly transformed void. The humans smiled down at them. "We walked into the darkness and we brought light. That is what humans do." And for the first time, the darkest void was no longer feared. It was a place of life, joy, and possibility. And all across the galaxy, the story of the human who walked into the void carrying her twins spread, inspiring hope, courage, and wonder in every corner.